I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was a tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was a tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom, oh, it's all I know. The old made new when I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy. The chains they break at the way of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me, said son heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open. You called my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day.
My love, I had a dream last night. Saw a rider on the wind, a stranger to my eyes, was on the outside looking in, and the land he's longing for dim and distant shore of my life. My love, I heard the pilgrim's call. I saw it was forsaking all. I cried because I knew that it meant my living new. But the treasures that I'll gain outweigh the losses that remain in my life. Sail me away, sail me away, sail me away. My love, the man is older now, and wisdom's now my guide and light, that led me off to foreign lands. Though I've never left your side, and the treasures I now bear is not all I wish to share with your life. Sail me away, sail me away, sail me away.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy that you chose to join us today on this Sunday morning, virtually from wherever you are, whether you're at home or on the road or on the beach or somewhere out there you are watching this, and I am glad that you chose to be here. This is going to be a little bit unique and different. I'm not used to singing by myself or playing the acoustic by myself, unless it's behind closed doors by myself with no one else around. But here I am, getting ready to sing you a few different songs I threw together as a medley to sort of represent the message I'm sharing with you today. I hope you enjoy. Through you the mute will sing, through you the dead will rise, through you our hearts will praise, through you the darkness flees, through you my heart screams, I am free, I am free. I where the streets have no name. I wanna feel sunlight on my face. I see the dust cloud disappear without a trace. I wanna take shelter from the poison rain, where the streets have no name. Where the streets have no name. Where the streets have no name. We're still building and burning down love, burning down love. And when I go there with you. It's all I can do. I am free to run. I am free to dance. I am free to live for you. Free to live for you. I am free. I am free. I am free. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered. All I am is yours. I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered. All I am is yours. I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrender. All I am is yours.
The reading today is two short verses, verses 1 and 13 of Galatians 5. And Garet said I could give you some context to those verses. The audience that Paul was writing to was a diverse group, including Jews, Gentiles, slaves, and women, who were all entrapped in the economic and patriarchal system. And by anybody's standards, they were not free to determine their own lives. The Jews were a particularly strong vocal group who who didn't like Paul's liberal approach in including the Gentiles. These Jewish Christians still wanted the new converts to observe the rituals that they did, which included being circumcised. But Paul was having none of it, no cultural boundary markers of who was in and who was out. So here is Paul in verse 1 of Galatians 5. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. You can imagine that some of the listeners would be cheering at these words. Others strongly objected. We need these distinguishing markers. For yet another group, maybe Paul's talk of the freedom that comes from being a Christ follower would have stirred a response of, well, I will now do whatever I like. It's my life. In our next verse for today, Paul then goes on to talk about a very different kind of freedom, a challenge for us in the culture we live, which reveres our individualistic culture of I can do what I want. So, our last verse, verse 13. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. May God help us to do that.
Good morning. Happy Sunday to everybody. For us, it's actually Tuesday night, which is kind of fun and weird and unique. We're doing this in our family's den, my office, flex room, whatever you want to call it. But we're at my house, and this is different. This is really different. Erin's behind the camera for the first time, so we'll see how she does. Say hello. Hi. That's the third time. Yeah, this is the third time we tried this. It's just so weird. But anyway, we hope you enjoy today's service with the different music that we were able to provide for you, and I hope today is an encouraging message for you as we talk about this idea, this theme of Exodus. And last week, Ronnie concluded his series on the life and story of Joseph. And in that series, we saw a remarkable series of events in his life, in addition to his steadfast trust and faith in God, even in the midst of difficult circumstances and trials. We saw teaching moments on trust, on forgiveness, on faith, on perseverance, and so on. And we know that immediately following this story is the book of Exodus. Now, Joseph and his brothers' descendants had inhabited the land of Egypt, and they were there for over 400 years. And in the midst of that, the Egyptian powers that came to be saw the Israelites as a massive threat to their power. Thus, they enslaved the descendants until the time of Moses. Now, I'm not going to dive into this particular story we all know so well, of Moses and Pharaoh and plagues, the Red Sea, the Exodus. But I want to pick up on one central theme that runs throughout the Bible, and that is the idea of Exodus. That this liberating freedom is a core piece of understanding not just the story of the Israelites, but also understanding our story as adopted sons and daughters of God. Now, in Paul's letter to the Galatian church, it serves as one of the biggest and helpful reminders of what it means to be liberated from a life of bondage. For the new believers at that time, leading up to Jesus' time and thereafter, we see that the law of Moses had become a bit of a hurdle or an obstacle for people. And so people had gotten to the point where it became legalistic, where this idea of trying to follow the law became a thing of enslavement, where it became more of a bondage than anything else. So a little bit of backdrop, Paul had visited Galatia, and many Jews and Gentiles became believers. And at some point, Jewish believers, those that became believers in Jesus, began teaching a false doctrine based on Old Testament laws that believers no longer had to follow. Paul calls these people out, and these people in the book of Galatians are called Judaizers, and he reminds the Galatian people of the gospel he first shared with them. Until the time of Jesus, Jews were taught to follow the law of Moses found in the Torah. And as you see throughout the gospel stories, the Pharisees and other religious leaders, they taught this. They taught the law of Moses, but they tended to add their own laws in a way that became a massive burden for people. And we often see Jesus at odds with the different religious leaders calling them out for stuff like this. You would see Jesus get real upset with them and call them out. It's something that you often see, that this law of Moses really became a burden for a lot of people because of what the Pharisees and religious leaders were doing. But what Jesus did in turn, he shared that he didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Because the law wasn't established to further alienate people from God. It was actually meant to serve as a means for people to live for God, while also reminding them that their reliance should be on Him and Him alone, nothing else. And in the end, its purpose was also meant to show them a need for a Savior. So Jesus sums up the law. He compiles all this, the Old Testament law that the Pharisees and other people had taught, 613 different laws. He sums it up with 2 commands, which is love God and love others. And this is the message that Paul had sent out. And this is the message that he had shared with the Galatian church. So when the Judaizers began forcing old laws that were fulfilled through Jesus, they were leading these new believers back to an old system that was counterproductive to the system Jesus had established. The law became a hindrance, and then people became slaves to that, working tirelessly to live a life they couldn't possibly live. So you can see why this would upset Paul. If Jesus established a new system to lessen the burden of what it means to follow God, to know who He is, and to live for Him, if He set apart a new system, the Judaizers were leading them down a destructive path. So Paul, paraphrasing Paul's words, he essentially says to the Galatians, we're no longer slaves to this old system, this old law. Jesus fulfilled that, and He set apart a new way, and this new system brings about a freedom that liberates us and sets us apart. He says in Galatians chapter 2, verses 19 through 21, "For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing." Essentially, what Paul is saying is that this old way of living, this old way of living became a trap for him. And once he found Jesus, once he believed in Jesus and God had wrecked his life, once he realized who Jesus was and set apart to live his life for Him, he recognized that the law no longer exists because of what Jesus did, that Jesus actually liberated him, because when he was following the law, it became this massive burden that he couldn't keep up with. He became a slave to that, and he couldn't fulfill it. There was nothing he could do to live a life set apart doing this. And so when he found Jesus, he says, I became crucified through Christ. And I no longer live. That life I used to live, that used to be enslaved in this way of living, that's no longer a part of who I am. I have been crucified with Christ. Basically saying, I'm no longer that way, but I'm living this new way of life. He's no longer a slave to that. Now, do you see the theme of Exodus in that? The Exodus, the story of liberation, is a constant and central theme, finding its way in different stories of the Bible, seeking to liberate people from enslavement, to systems, to corruption, to oppression, to broken relationships, to bondage, to addictions, and so on. And later Paul says, it is for freedom that Christ set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Now, Paul concludes this letter to the Galatian church by encouraging believers to not use that freedom for self-gratification and selfish desires, which he calls living for the flesh, but to use it to serve one another in love. So Paul makes it as a point to say, hey, because of Jesus, we have this newfound freedom that liberates us from this old way of living that used to keep us trapped. Jesus sets it apart and says, love God and love other people. That's simple enough. Don't allow these other things to weigh you down, because that way of life is not the way of Jesus. Jesus makes it simple. But Paul makes it a point to say, don't use that freedom, though, and keep it to yourself. And don't use that freedom, that grace of Jesus, to live a life that isn't healthy or good for you or other people. And so he shares about the sins of the flesh and how we live our life usually produces a fruit. And that's where he gets into the idea of fruit of the Spirit, that however we're living produces a fruit. So look at the fruit. Are we living a life that's filled with selfish desires and ambitions, or are we living a life that's pursuing Jesus? And he says, don't use that freedom to push for this lifestyle when it's not healthy, but use it for the good of other people, for serving one another out of love. Now, while researching and writing this message, I came across this amazing story of this idea of serving one another out of love. And it's of this guy named Aaron Salter. Now, Aaron is 38 years old now, but when he was 36, he was released from prison after spending 15 years for a murder he didn't commit. After being exonerated, he has worked tirelessly. Man, whoo, it's a tough one. Tirelessly. Anyway, he's worked tirelessly to provide housing and stability to those who have been set free after being wrongly accused by the justice system. He shared that after his release, there was no system or established rehabilitation program to help former inmates get reestablished back into society. He said, quote, "When I came home, no one was there to provide housing or basic necessities that I needed," end quote. Mr. Salter has worked tirelessly to help develop a nonprofit called Innocence Maintained that helps provide housing and other needs for exonerated people or persons transitioning back into society. Now, obviously, Aaron could have been upset with the justice system or angry at the way he was served or how things played out. Any person in their right mind would be bitter. But he says of his time in prison that his whole fight was about making things easier for other people, and that he was consumed toward helping others and never really thought of himself. In his organization's motto, it's about making people better, not bitter. The Exodus story is a central theme that finds its way into our lives, liberating and freeing us from certain bondages that try to entangle us. In this story, this Exodus story, it breaks down all these barriers. It breaks down chains, it tears down walls, it restores relationships, and brings hope to us, and it brings hope to others and to the world around us. If you're like me, which if you are, kudos to you. It's fun being me. But if you're like me, you probably love to kick your morning off with a cup of coffee. And, now that I mention it, I don't know if that means I need my own Exodus story or liberation from my addiction to coffee, but nevertheless, I love kicking off my day with a good cup of coffee. Now, I'm not a coffee connoisseur, but I have, over the years of drinking coffee, learned how to make it, the ins and outs of coffee and different things about it. There are a large variety of ways of making coffee. In addition to that, there's a variety of beans that come from different parts of the world. And based on where these beans come from, the altitude that they're grown, it all changes how the different flavors of coffee beans, which is just absolutely incredible. So if you get a coffee bean from South America, it's going to taste a little bit different from a coffee bean from Central America or Ethiopia or South Africa, or just it's amazing wherever these beans come from dictates the type of flavor that you're going to get. Furthermore, you can change the type of flavor of this bean based on the roast. So you have a few different types of roast, just to keep it simple. You have light, medium, and dark. And by doing that, it creates a different flavor of this bean. Even more beyond that, you can change the type of flavor you extract from the bean by the size of the ground that you get from the bean. So if you make it really fine, that's usually how you make your espresso. If you make it a little bit coarse, that's how you do some of your French press. And that's another thing. There's many different ways in how to not just grind the coffee to extract a different flavor, but how hot you make the temperature of the water or the pouring mechanism that you use to make your coffee. But you're getting the point that there's many different ways to make coffee, to make different flavors. And then you have all the additives after the end of that. But I think we're done with this idea of coffee. We love our coffee, but what we hold in our cup right before taking a big old sip of it is really unique. It's really incredible thinking about everything, all the details that go into making that. Here's the point. We each have a story. We each have a background. We come from some place, somewhere, and we're heading in a direction, down a path, on whatever journey we're on. And we bring a unique flavor to the world, to those around us. The path we've taken to get here and our story and journey absolutely matters. There's no doubt some journeys have been harder than others, but nevertheless, we're here now and we bring a unique flavor to the table. My question to you is really quite simple. What is your Exodus story? And how is God using your story to continue to influence your life and the lives of those around you? Are you allowing God to use you? Is your story one of breaking away from a bad church experience or potentially addiction or getting out of a broken household where your parents were abusive or a bad relationship or self-doubt? Whatever it is, you have a story. And it most likely includes some sort of Exodus story of you being liberated from something for something. Your story, your unique blend of flavoring matters. Now, the story of the Exodus, it's not just a story about this group of people that happened back then. It's a story that continues on. It moves on. And it's a story of liberation for us here and now and those around us and those down the road. It's a freedom that we have in Christ. It's a story that belongs to the world. It's a story that may bring freedom to others through our lifestyle, the conversations we have. We each have a skill set. We each have something unique about who we are. We have our own flavor that's meant to be used to reach the audience that surrounds us. Who you reach is different than who I reach. And that's not to say that, hey, I'm not good enough to reach the people you know, but here's the thing. I have different parents than you. I have different grandparents. I have different friends. I came from a different area of the United States. I have a different upbringing. So my particular story, my unique flavor, reaches a different audience. And that's okay. And yours is different too. But the thing that we have to keep in mind is that because of who we are, who we are made to be, and the thing that makes us who we are is an incredible asset that we can reach those around us that other people can't. And when you think about it that way, think about how you can use who you are, your stories, the things you've been through, the things you've gone through, and how you've been brought out of that, the Exodus story, the power that you have in that to reach somebody, to potentially bring an Exodus story to their life. We're all unique. We all bring something to the table. And what you do is different than what I can do. And how amazing is that?
And, I think it is important to note that, we're along this journey, we're being tweaked. We're not completely we're not completely the person that God has set out for us to become. And that's okay. It's a journey. It's a journey where we're being refined, we're being renewed. It's this process, and it's a learning thing for us. And that's okay, but the importance is allowing ourselves to be opened up to God moving in and through us, of using our unique skill set and story of liberation so that we can reach others in a big and powerful way. But if Paul's words matter, then the love we have in Christ should spur us on into serving one another out of that love. The Exodus story liberates us to be fully who God wants us to be. And we need to lean into that. We need to trust that. We need to be refined, reworked, and renewed by that God who sets us free. And if we're open to that, if we remain a vessel or conduit of that love, we might be the spark that creates an Exodus story in someone else's life. Serve one another out of love. We're no longer slaves to the person we once were, to that relationship, to that addiction. As long as we choose to allow God to work in our lives in a big and powerful way, as long as we choose to continue moving and living for Him, not satisfying the desires of the flesh, as Paul says, but really leaning into the person God chooses or has set apart for us to be, choosing love, grace, hope, peace, kindness, forgiveness. That's who God desires us to be. And as if we choose to lean into that and we be a conduit of that grace and forgiveness and love and liberation, that spark we can create in someone else's life can be monumental. Choose to allow yourself to do that. Continue leaning into your story, to who God created you to be.